Africana, your non-stop entertainment radio.
I'm fair.
Loud enough. Loud enough in the ears.
No, I can't hear it.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Et après la victoire historique de la légende du Real Madrid, une grosse polémique est née en Espagne. Et tu vas la découvrir dans cette. Avant de
You guys are on mute still, it looks like. We can't hear anything. Unless we're not supposed to.
Anyway, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Right. So tonight we have a hot topic tonight. It's all about the COVID vaccine and the updates. So what we're going to do, listeners, feel free to shoot any question to the doctors, and they are specialists. They are going to answer to your question. So firstly, I'm Monique, and this is Esther. So we're going to introduce the speakers to start with, and then they are going to present themselves. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Go for
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So, okay, we have the first guest panel we have tonight is Liz Lamerton. She's here today as a pharmacist. She's going to present herself. We have Dr. Joe Paul, who is a consultant. We have Teresa Kelly. We have Heather Cordell. And then we have Dr. Leonard Ebert, who is absent tonight. So he apologized for it. So what we're going to do, shall we start with the first one? Dr. Joe Paul, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Monique, Esther. It's lovely to be here with you all this evening. And briefly, I'm Dr. Joel Paul. I'm a consultant virologist and the clinical director for infection sciences covering the Northern Care Alliance. I have worked for the last 2 years mainly on COVID, as we all know, as a virologist. And it's a pleasure to be here with you to try and answer some of your questions. I can promise you that if we don't have an answer for you tonight, we will get back to you through Monique and Esther and answer those questions subsequently by email or by a telephone call. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Next one, Dr. Teresa Kelly.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm Teresa Kelly. I'm a consultant obstetrician at St Mary's in Manchester, which is the biggest maternity unit in the country. So I look after pregnant women with complicated pregnancies. I'm part of the maternal medicine team, so we've looked after all the pregnant women that have had COVID that have been in our hospital, and I've led on the vaccinations for anyone who's pregnant, and got our rates really high last year, and we're just on the autumn booster campaign. Because that's recommended if you're pregnant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. So the next one will be Heather Cordell, please.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Monique. My name is Heather Cordell. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer for the Northern Care Alliance. I'm also the Director of Infection Prevention and Control. And during COVID, I was also part of the senior nurse leadership team who advised the National Chief Nursing Officer as part of the response unit to COVID. So I've had quite a few years of experience in this field.
Right, thank you very much, Heather. So we got everybody introducing themselves. That sounds so exciting. Are you excited tonight? Monique introduced everybody, she was rushing to make sure that everybody is waiting and excited to hear this hot topic, because it has been quiet. We have not been speaking about COVID lately. So when we were actually advertising the show, everybody was like, does it still exist? Do we still have to go for the boosters? There's different vaccine going around. So a lot of people had questions. So we're really, really excited to hear all the questions and especially all the answers as well. I will try with what I know. Probably I don't know anything, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, how was your week before we carry on with this?
Busy as usual. My week was, busy, work, home, it's just as usual, to be honest. But what can you do? You have to pay for your bills with this inflation. You have to work as well. So what about you?
I'm just excited. I'm going to be turning 40 soon. And then
This 40 again.
Yes, we're back the year that I turned 40. And I'm really excited because I'm graduating on Friday. So I've been planning that in my head, not physically. So anyway, enough about us. So we're going to go back to our panels because we have a few questions coming up. Monique, do you want to read the first one?
Okay. So the first question I have is, who is eligible for an autumn boosters and why?
Take that one first. My role remains, I am to be the team who deliver the vaccine. So we are saying now, anybody aged over 50 in the country, so anybody who has an underlying health condition, so anything that can make people more susceptible to the infection. And importantly, people who know are more likely to perform really poorly if they get COVID infection. So anybody over 50 now.
Please, we're struggling to hear you. It's
no. I'll shout that a bit. So anybody over 50.
Oh, that's better.
And anybody who's got underlying health conditions or anybody who's pregnant. So any of those is a huge range of people who are eligible to come forward for vaccines. And we also still invite anybody who hasn't yet had the first or second doses.
We can't, okay.
Vaccines. So it's never too late to have a vaccine, but
I can't hear what.
Even if you're up to date, you can still have a booster if you're over 50 or you've got health conditions or you're pregnant.
All right. Thank you. Esther, do you want to go for the next? Thank you, Liz. Even though we were struggling a bit to hear, I don't know if it's your speaker at home or something. Probably. Are you okay with that? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, she's going to, I think she's trying to fix it. Yeah, want to go for the next question? Thank you very much.
Sure. Right, our next question tonight is, has COVID gone away?
Do you want me to take that question?
Sure, go for it.
Thanks, Esther. Can you hear me clearly, first of all?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yeah. Fantastic, thank you. So the simple answer is no, it's not gone. It's here. It's present in various forms. So if you're asking the question of whether the original strain or the first COVID that came out 2 years ago, is it still there? It's probably lurking somewhere, but lots of variants came out. You must have heard that there are alpha, beta, delta, and the latest one was the Omicron variant that came out. So the original COVID virus is present in various different forms now in variants. So this is what we call as variants of concern, and it's been spreading in different parts of the world in different forms. So one of the key things to remember is that even though you may hear terms along the lines of there's an Omicron now, it's still a COVID virus. So that's a key bit to remember. Yeah, there might be slight changes on its protein structure, the way the virus presents, but the kind of infection it causes, the way it spreads to people, and the way it causes disease in people, and the primary disease that it causes in people is still existent. We had a small respite when summer came, when the numbers dropped, and the period of low incidence was seen in this country, which is good. But the latest markers from the Office for National Statistics and from other markers, we are seeing that the COVID virus in the form of an Omicron variant, a subvariant, is starting to slowly rise again. And the prediction is that going into winter, we will see more of this COVID virus along with flu. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Doctor. So we just have to remind the Kitcheners that the speakers are connected via Zoom. So it's just a quick reminder. So I can see a question here on the message. It's saying it's saying who can get COVID-19 vaccine? Everyone age 5 on or before 31st of August 2022 and over can get a first and second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. So
I think they're explaining who can get the COVID and people age 16.
Yeah, so I've put in the chat.
Oh, okay.
The list of who can have the vaccine. So I'm sorry you were struggling to hear me, but that's the information there if people want to go back to it.
Right.
All right, that's good. Thank you. Thank you very much. We can hear you now. Yeah,
we
can definitely hear you now. Thank you very much for fixing that. Okay, this next question here that I have here is why should we have give us that? Why should we have COVID and flu
vaccine?
And then and the flu vaccine. Why should we have it?
Both.
I mean, I can start with that because I have that chat with people every day because the women that I see who are pregnant are eligible for both. I mean, these are different viruses, so neither vaccine, the flu vaccine is not going to protect you from getting COVID. COVID vaccine won't protect you from flu. The flu is quite prevalent this year, but we were worried about it because we knew it peaked early in Australia. And I know that we've had a couple of people in already who are, obviously, if you're pregnant, you're young, who've been in already or have already had flu. So it's much earlier this year than normal, I think. I think Dr. Stroll will tell me more, maybe it's just my impression. But you need to have both vaccines to protect you against both viruses. There's more than one flu virus as well, so the flu vaccine doesn't just protect you against one flu virus. There's a few viruses that will protect you again, but neither of these illnesses, they might be mild, but they might not be mild. Certainly my 16-year-old had flu when she was 14 and she spent a weekend in bed when I was on call. She didn't enjoy it. I've had flu, I've not particularly enjoyed it, I certainly don't want it again. So even if you're young and fit, it can take you out for a few days and it's not pleasant.
Great stuff. Thank you for that.
Teresa.
Can I add to that, Monique?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. So for our listeners, you need to think of this one as the best example I can give is if you think of a truck and you think of a bus, they both are vehicles. So essentially, both influenza and COVID are viruses, but they are very different from each other. Yeah. So you can imagine they both cause sort of similar infections. They transmit through respiratory route. So if somebody is coughing and if you're not protected yourself against the vaccine and if you're not wearing appropriate masks and other things, you can catch the infection. Interestingly, both are respiratory infections and some of the symptoms, or I would say about most of the symptoms actually look similar for both flu and for COVID. So you can get fever with flu, you can get fever with COVID, you can get headache with flu, you can get headache with COVID, you can have a runny nose or a cough with flu or with COVID. So even though the symptoms are similar, they are two different viruses. And the reason why that's important is because Yeah. So
sorry about that.
Yeah. So what you use for the truck, you can't use for the bus. Essentially, that's the analogy I can use. So you need to have two separate vaccines to produce antibodies against those two separate viruses that will protect you this year. The reason why that was not, we have always had the influenza vaccines that we have been giving for many, many years. But when COVID came in 2019, late 2019, early 2020, we saw that the influenza virus numbers decreased in a big way across the globe. Now, that was because of many different reasons, because of lockdowns and because of the fact that we were working differently and we were using lots of masks and other things. But this year, ever since the lockdowns have all reduced now and people have started moving around without masks and things like that, the worry is that this winter we will probably see both influenza and COVID hitting us at the same time. And that's the reason why we are asking all the eligible people to make sure that they get the vaccines for both, especially this year. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. We've got a question here on our mobile. The person is asking, how can I prevent COVID-19?
Is that a question for Heather, with our infection
Heather.
director? Head on, Heather. I think that's probably a good one for you.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Esther. Thanks for that question.
You're welcome.
Well, how you protect, prevent COVID-19 is a range of measures. We've heard from Dr. Joel and Liz about the vaccine. That's one protection. Prevention is a protection. The other one, the biggest one, is hand washing. And people usually end with that, but I want to begin with that. The reason why hand washing is so important is because we use our hands. And we use our hands to touch things. We use our hands to touch our face. And the virus is a very, very, it's a very resilient organism, but you can wash it away, literally. And if you Google and download how to wash your hands for those 20 seconds, then I would suggest that everyone does that. That's the best protection and way of staying away from COVID. The other way, of course, is to use protection in terms of masks. We call it protective equipment, personal protective equipment, PPE, and certainly in health environments you use that. And all PPE it comprises of things that protect our clothing, so aprons, things that protect our faces and our breathing masks. But we normally talk about masks as well as PPE, but that's a form of protection. Gloves as well is a form of protection, and all these provide a barrier between yourself and surfaces, and that may have the COVID virus on it. But hand washing is your biggest your biggest protection. One of the ways you can use masks now that it's no longer necessary or mandated is when you have flu-like symptoms. So testing is not as widespread as it used to be. Excuse me. So if you have flu-like symptoms, means you're coughing or sneezing, what a mask does is that it prevents the organisms, the virus, from spreading, excuse me, as a result of coughing, which I've just done, and sneezing.
Right. All right.
Thank you. I have to say, I'm still wearing a mask. I know a lot of people aren't, but COVID's airborne, so a lot of it is in the air. So I'm still wearing a mask. If I'm going on a plane next week, I'll be wearing a mask on a plane. I know they're uncomfortable, and I'm used to them because I wear them all day, so it's not as big a problem to me. But I would certainly wear them. We're still asking you to wear them in healthcare, and I think if you come in, and you come into a healthcare environment, you don't know what the people in beside you have got. So it's really worth putting that mask on at the front door of a hospital or a GP's when you come in to protect yourself, and think about it. It's something simple you can do if you're on the bus, you're on the train. That's a good way. And I do advise people, if they're not vaccinated, that they think about wearing a mask as well.
Right. So we should be wearing masks. I kind of don't wear it anymore, but I think I should go back to it. Right, before we allow Benny to ask a question, there's one more question from the same person. She's asking, or if he's asking, if someone smoked tobacco or nicotine, is he at risk for complication from COVID-19?
I mean, I will invite my medical colleagues to come in, but I would say the risk that smoking presents is widespread. It really gets in the way of your lungs helping you to breathe because of the amount of material gunk that is in your lungs, and anything that gets in the way of you being able to breathe will not stand you in good stead against something like the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus. I beg your pardon. So smoking generally is something that you should stay away from, and definitely in terms of the risks of complications of COVID, it exacerbates the respiratory symptoms of the virus. But I saw that Dr. Paul was coming in there. You might be able to offer more scientific explanation.
Thanks, Heather. I think you covered most of it actually. But the question about smoking is going beyond just the lungs. Just remember that when you smoke, the smoke that goes into your lungs, the nicotine and the tartar gets absorbed into your body and deposits itself on blood vessels in your heart, lots of other parts of your body. And the reason why that's important is, if you remember from the early days of COVID, one of the commonest things that we saw in our patients that I managed in our ICUs was they were all getting lots of this clot formation in their blood vessels, and there were lots of people are getting heart related disease and things like that. If there is somebody who's got an underlying defect in their arteries already with damage due to cigarette smoke related nicotine, the chances of forming those clots, the chances of affecting your lungs, your livers, and your heart itself is very high. So multiple studies done across the globe have shown that those people who sadly died of COVID with or without vaccinations had lots of comorbidities. And one of the most important comorbidities was cigarette smoking. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. So we're going to move on to Bennett. Can you please unmute yourself and then ask your question?
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. So before I ask my question, I have just something to also add, because I think we're talking about mask wearing. And I don't know if you all agree with me, but I think that the mask wearing is preventive in a sense of the spreading. It's not really protecting yourself per se, because I think the hand washing is, but I think the mask wearing falls more into protecting others. Isn't it the case?
Yeah, I think that's right. Masks you're protecting others, and that's part of why I make it. It does protect you a bit as well. If both people wear it, then that's the best thing. Both people wearing the mask is the most protection. It depends what level of mask. When I'm going on a plane, I put on an FFP2, which is a bit tighter. That'll protect me a bit more. The surgical masks are mainly protecting other people. So I agree. Yeah. I've gotten into the habit of wearing it. I've decided to keep wearing them. But obviously it's not mandated. But in hospital, if everyone's wearing them, then we're going to reduce it. But you're absolutely right. It's mainly protect other people.
Yeah. Well, my question was with the vaccines, because I know we had a wave where at some point it was compulsory, and then especially for NHS staff, and now it's back to a choice. But I don't know how do we deal with the issues of anxiety and of the vaccines itself. I don't know, because the thing is, we went from AZ to Pfizer to Moderna, and now we have Moderna bivalent one, where it's actually includes Omicron proteins. So I think the more we're moving from vaccines to vaccines for people who are not clinical, it's just increasing the level of anxiety to actually go and get a jab. So I don't know how the issues of, this trial, because sometimes it still feels like a trial, because when you're moving from one to another, with no clear explanation of why we keep moving. And then if it's, of course, it's probably because the virus mutates, in itself. But how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the issue of anxiety? Because I still have staff at my place of work that are saying that they will not have the Moderna. If it was Pfizer, they might have, because they had Pfizer before and they were fine with the Pfizer, but they're not going to have the Moderna, especially the bivalent one, which is now the one that they're giving to everybody. So it's like, I don't know, is there like a way to deal with these anxieties? How do we really explain to people, the benefits of the vaccines?
So do you want me to start with that? So I think you're right. In this country and across the world, there's been something like 1.8 billion vaccines given. So there are lots and lots of people that have had the vaccines, and there's been a lot of money spent on the vaccines, so we know that. But what that's meant is that they could develop them much more rapidly than perhaps they would have for lots of other medicines. So I think for a lot of people, it feels as if there's a new one and a new one and a new one. But when all the agencies work together, which still happens with COVID, the regulators still go through the same regulatory process. So there's still the same number of checks. So each of these vaccines that come out are being reviewed quickly, but to the same extent by the regulators, which means that we're able to keep up a bit more than perhaps we might have been with other things. So the bivalent vaccines have been trialled and they've been tested. So the booster program, the study started earlier on this year. I actually took part in one of the booster studies myself. So I personally took part in this bivalent study, the Moderna one. So I'd had Pfizer vaccines up to that point, and then I took part in the Moderna study. And there is some evidence that says that actually mixing the vaccines may be beneficial. There's other evidence that says that mixing them may increase your side effects. People are different. We all know some people that have had all Pfizer and then a Moderna and had a few side effects. We all also know people that have had the Moderna and been fine and not felt any different and carried on working. So when we're giving vaccines in such a high scale to so many people, we know that we'll see a full range of side effects and effects from them. As far as which vaccines are available, we started the booster program with the Moderna Spikevax bivalent. So that's got the original and the Omicron. We're now starting to use a Pfizer bivalent. So that's the Pfizer Comirnaty, which is the original and the Omicron variant. So over the next few weeks, it may be that people see that the Pfizer produced vaccine is being used more commonly. So if you haven't had your booster so far, it may well be the Pfizer one that you're offered in practice. The AstraZeneca one isn't made and bought in the UK anymore. So the AstraZeneca vaccine isn't an option. So the two main ones remain the Pfizer made one and the Moderna made vaccine.
Yeah, that's answered my question. Thanks. Yeah.
Anita, can I come in about the anxiety? Because I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Obviously, I see young people who are relatively young people who are pregnant that we're offering vaccines to, and everybody's cautious about what you can do in pregnancy. But I think in general, a lot of people who are anxious, it's because there's been misinformation on social media and they've heard a lot of things. And I think the way to combat anxiety is actually to sit down with people if they've got questions and try and answer those questions and direct them to the proper information and reassure them about what the actual facts are. And I find when you have those conversations, those one-to-one conversations, people understand. I mean, as moving from vaccines, I've had 27 or 28 flu vaccines. I think I started in 1994 having a flu vaccine, and they've been tweaked every year. I think I probably had a different one. I never asked about it. I knew they'd been changed, never asked what it was. It never bothered me. I had it because they do it with the vaccine that's going to protect you against the strain of flu that's out that year. And it's the same with the booster vaccines. That's why it's changed. It's changed because it's going to give you better protection. So I see the change as a good thing. I'd much rather have, I had Moderna bivalent, I'd had 3 Pfizers. I didn't even have a sore arm with this one. You know, my 16-year-old, I took her for a booster because she's only had 2 vaccines. When she went for a booster, she still got the normal Pfizer. I'd much prefer to her to have the updated Moderna, but that's what we're offering at the moment. So I would say that the change in the vaccines has been a good thing. That means the companies have been responsive and they're not just sticking to the vaccine that we've been given and people are caught it with. So it's just like the flu vaccine, and this will probably become an annual thing. Who knows, it might be mixed with the flu vaccines, but I think we need to attack some of the myths and the information that's coming out, because there's a lot of people out there who seem to like scaring people, and they spread misinformation, and it's really it's quite distressing sometimes when you hear the stories that have put people off, when you can actually see the other side of it. And almost everybody, in fact, we have not admitted anyone who's pregnant to my unit with COVID who's been vaccinated. There was one person I think I can remember being admitted for observation. Everybody else who's been sick with COVID has been unvaccinated. And a lot of them have said, oh, I'm not having it now, I'll wait till I've had my baby. And then they get a complication, they get a clot in their lung, they get admitted to hospital, a range of complications that I can go through. And that's the bit that scares me, the effects of COVID. You know, I know it's different because when you go for a vaccine, you've got to make a positive decision to go and get something put in your arm that you'd rather not have. But you know, and you think, well, I might be able to avoid COVID, but actually you can't because it's invisible. So I understand the hesitation, but I think those one-to-one conversations are where we can help.
Yeah, but don't you think, I understand what you said about the media, but don't you think that it could also be the fact that people felt coerced to do something? Because I know even with children, like when you tell them exactly what to do, like you need to do this, you need it, even if it's really important for them, you tend to have like a resistance. And I know at some point it felt like it was forced in a sense, especially onto NHS staff, you know, and people started to have, there was already some type of resistance, but I think that has probably made it even worse to, you know, why that, because it's not really the case with the flu vaccine. You don't have people forcing you. And I know that the flu vaccine didn't really cause as much damage as COVID did, but I don't know if, you know, if that could have also been one of the reasons why people, you know, have much even more, you know, were more reluctant into actually going to get a jab, the COVID jab.
Yeah, I think there's always a balance, isn't there? I think I disagree with you. There are complications from the flu vaccine. I think the complications are pretty much the same. Liz will probably know more about that to me, but I don't think there's much difference between the complications from the vaccine between flu and COVID vaccines. I think we're just more aware of them. So I think coercion is different. The people who were asked to get vaccinated, you know, were people who are working with vulnerable people, who are working, you know, in healthcare or in social care. Now, in the States, you've had to be, most healthcare providers won't give you a job, or you can't keep your job unless you have an annual flu vaccine. We've never done that this country. So I agree, it's always a balance. But when I was talking to staff, I was very much focusing on, please do this for yourself. You know, do this for your family. Don't take flu home. Don't take COVID home. You know, and I've done that with flu vaccines every year. Since I started as a consultant, trying to persuade people to have flu vaccines. For some people, the mandate, you know, worked. For other people, they were prepared to, you know, put them off, and they took the choice. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what the best approach is, but my parents went into hospital and they caught COVID or flu from a member of staff who was unvaccinated. I would be really upset.
Yeah, true. Yeah, thank you very much.
Heather,
go Heather, yeah, sorry.
Go on, Heather.
Thank you. I mean, on the issue of coercion and forcing people, I just wanted to describe the measures and the means that governments across the world had in their power to ensure that the pandemic was under control. So a part of health that really oversees the management of a pandemic is public health. Mm-hmm. And the means that they have with which they use to manage a pandemic are figures and data. And mm-hmm. they do a bit of modeling as well. And when I say modeling, it's almost like play. They take what they know the virus is capable of doing, mm-hmm. and then they play out a scenario over using a fictitious population size, certain conditions, and then they run this game, if you like, to see mm-hmm. what the worst case scenario will be. And what that then does is it gives them a picture of what they need to do to stop it. And the measures mm-hmm. that they use are normally numbers. So when you think of the fact that they have, for example, the numbers, they say a population of about 1 million people. If the virus starts in this population uncontrolled, X amount of people will die in X amount of days. And what they knew about the virus, when it comes to the level of preventing a pandemic, they model that situation. They then model what the numbers need to be to stop the spread. Mm-hmm. And I think, Bennett, your point about forcing and coercion, mm-hmm. or was it, I think it was Esther Monique who said about forcing, is that when they have numbers, that then needs to translate into governments putting measures in place to keep the numbers under control. So public health, or in the case of a pandemic, the public health is the World Health. So the World Health Organization, they have an idea which they have scientifically mapped to see how the virus will spread. They have the numbers that they need to control, and then they share that with countries. And you can imagine different countries will have different ways of controlling the spread and the numbers. And sometimes some countries have more engaging, more compassionate, more cooperative means of getting people to listen and do the right thing. Other countries might have different ways of doing it. But that's the interplay between the scientists knowing what a virus can do, modeling it or playing with a fictitious scene, if you like, to help get into the heads of the scientists of how to protect it or prevent the public in real life. They give that to the governments, and they then put measures in place to control the numbers. I hope that made sense, by the way.
Well, yeah, it does. It's very clear. Well, to me.
Yeah, Benit, are you happy with the answer, Benit? That she was.
Oh yes,
yes.
Sorry,
okay.
I was on mute. I've not noticed. I said yes, it does, but it doesn't take away the way in which you go about doing it, because the main idea of the government, of course, was protection. It's protecting the public, as you said, but it doesn't. But I think the method used can also have an impact on how people react. You know, so already we had the media that was, showing whatever they were showing when it came to COVID, and then having the government trying to impose a certain thing without clear explanation sometimes to some people, because for medical people, sometimes it can be understandable. You understand what is a vaccine, you understand it's not the virus, you understand all these things. But to the public, sometimes you need more. I think there should, it's already passed, but sometimes you should invest even more to like education, make sure that people really understand why they have to do what they need to do. That's why I gave the example of a child, even if it's for his good or her good, telling them exactly what to do sometimes can just lead to fights, and I think that's what has led to anxieties and people saying no, and then the same people who got vaccine started to say, okay, I'll get, who got the virus started to say they'll have the vaccine. So it was just a quest of, do they really understand what's going on? And but of course it was just a dilemma, I think.
Oh, thank you for that, Benet. I think anxiety, if people got more information, it will reduce the anxiety as well. That's what I think, lack of information sometimes can give you more anxiety, I think.
Yeah.
So,
It's about all education.
Yeah, it's all about just knowing what you're putting in your body, really. So thank you for that, Benet.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think Dr. Leonard wanted to say something before we put the Dr. Paul. Yeah. Okay, should we put him in?
So I just wanted to read that question because it's been there as well. It's fine.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, go on. Sorry, brother.
So just for Bennett, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the biggest lessons learned that they are doing right now is the way that governments across the country, across the globe, actually, in many parts of the world, the way that the media and the communications were sent out. It almost felt like at one point it was almost mandated that you have to take the vaccine, but all along there was the option or the choice that you can take it or not. And one of the reasons why very kindly Monique and Esther organized this group of bringing us all here. So all of us are doing this at our own free time, and the reason we want to be here is to make sure that those kind of misconceptions that it's being pushed on them is not true. The choice still lies with the people who want to take it or not take it. Yeah. So just to give an example, for every 100 people I speak to about the advantage of the vaccines and why that will be beneficial to them, I never ever have said to anybody to say, I demand you take this vaccine, not even to my own family. Yeah. So even within my own family, not my immediate family, but back home in India, there are few people who have still chosen not to take the vaccine. Yeah. So the point is that that the choice of the patient choice was something that I think could have been better spread by from the top. I think was one of the things that I wanted to say. The second thing that you were talking earlier, Benit, I can't see you. Sorry, I presume you're okay if I keep talking to a blank screen. That's okay, Benit. So the other thing that I wanted to quickly say to you was, I'll tell you a quick short story. I don't want to take too much time. Yesterday, we sat at home and we first discussed what should we have for our evening tea. And my little one, who's 12 years old, said, we feel like, yes, we have to eat food. So I said, shall we have some leftovers? The answer was, no, I want to have something hot, fresh. So we said, okay, let's get pizza. So I was sent out to go and get some Domino's pizza. So I went out to get Domino's pizza, and I came back home with a Pizza Hut pizza. And he looked at me and he said, for me, a pizza is a pizza. So I said, just eat it. What's the problem with this? And then the answer to the question was, there is a slight difference. I don't know which one. He said one of them is slightly more salty, and I didn't want that. I want this. I said, okay, then. So if you don't want the pizza, you can leave it here. And guess what? In 5 minutes' time, he came around and said, yeah, I'll have this pizza. Yeah. And then just to ask him a bit more, I told him, what if the Pizza Hut and Domino Pizza was not available and I brought you some Pizza Express? Do you think you would have eaten that? He said, no, I still want the Domino's pizza. So I guess the reason I'm telling you this story is because I have this discussion with some of my patients in the clinic when they come for vaccinations. As you probably know, we give lots of other vaccines as well for so many different things, for cancer cervix, for hepatitis B, for shingles, and for children with measles, mumps, and rubella, polio, the whole lot of things. There are multiple different companies that offer these vaccines. We don't put out names of those vaccines. What we tend to do is to tell them. So, as Teresa very rightly said, when we go and get our flu vaccines, we are only told, come and get your flu vaccine. They don't tell us, come and take this product X vaccine or product Y vaccine or product Z vaccine. Doesn't make sense. It's just that the way the COVID vaccines unfortunately came out in a way with lots of this pharmaceutical company names, and that stuck, unfortunately. Yeah. So the reality is that all these vaccines are designed and developed and tested and trialed and then released into the market to have exactly the same kind of output from the human body. So the human body, when it gets the vaccine, does not say, oh, this is a Moderna vaccine or this is a Pfizer vaccine. What it looks at finally is a vaccine against which it produces antibodies. And those antibodies all fight the same virus. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not justifying the fact that, that we should be giving different vaccines, but the fact remains that whether you go and get a simple paracetamol, there are at least about 170, Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong with this, there are at least hundreds of different paracetamols that's available outright, but they're all paracetamols, essentially. Does it make sense? Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, so what I'm trying to say is that this discussion about, oh, I had the AstraZeneca, then they gave me Pfizer, now they're telling Moderna, actually is one more thing that I think probably could have been controlled to say that, that this is a COVID vaccine, a vaccine against protecting you from severe disease and from death due to COVID. And that's the way it should go forward. The more important question that I think we should be asking is whether the COVID vaccine, not you, sorry, Vinit, I'm just saying, when I say you, what I mean is I myself ask myself this, whether the COVID-19 vaccine will become like the yearly flu vaccinations that all the qualifying people get in this country, or whether it is going to be like one of the vaccines that's given as a one-off. So our children get only one dose of some vaccines, isn't it? Yeah. So the question really is, we don't know yet because this virus and this disease is so new to us. And if you think about other diseases such as, say, tuberculosis, for example, or diphtheria, or polio, or tetanus, and things like that, we have hundreds of years, or at least about 100 years worth of experience with this disease and what it can do and how it can protect it from that. This disease is literally 2 years old, and we're still learning. And scientists across the globe are still trying to learn lots more about this disease. And the benefits of the vaccination in multiple different routes are shown that that it prevents against severity of the long COVID, prevents against severe disease landing up in the ICU, prevents against death, and lots of other things. So the message I think that I want to possibly pass on to you all is that it doesn't matter whether I get an AstraZeneca vaccine or a Moderna vaccine or a Pfizer vaccine. The bottom line is these are soldiers that are helping me to protect against a common enemy, and that's the COVID virus itself. That makes sense. So it's that kind of positive messaging I think will help, because all of you out in the community, I know that we'll be talking to friends about this, and that's where I think the benefit is for us to try and spread that message. And I don't know if all that I said made sense to Vinit, but that's my view. Thank you.
That's a very good point you've made there. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Paul. We've got one more question. I'm just going to allow the person in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, my question is it possible for the immune system in some people to develop some kind of resistance to COVID-19? That's my first question. And my second question is, this is more to do with the side effect of the vaccine. Because the reason I ask this question is because I have a friend who, before he got his vaccine, he was kind of like fit and he was doing some a lot of exercise, running. But after getting the vaccine, he said he's developed some kind of pain in his joints and he can't do his physical activities as he used to before. So what are those the kind of side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine, or is it just probably something else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have
Liz, do you want to try?
Liz?
No, Joe. So I think so to answer the question about somebody who was fit and well and then hasn't been as well after the vaccine, there's no specific way that the vaccine works or the side effects that should be causing it. Sometimes when you stimulate your immune system, whether that's through a virus itself or through a vaccine, sometimes it can make your body react in a what we call an inflammatory way. So sometimes people can get muscle aches or joint aches. For some of us, it's just after you've had the vaccine. So some people, when they've had a vaccine for perhaps a day or two, might feel a bit achy, a bit sore as the body's reacting to it. And in some people, that a very, very small number, that effect might last a little bit longer. So we do know of some people, particularly if they have some underlying conditions, that can find that they become a bit more active or that they have a bit more inflammation. What we do also know, though, is that if you react like that to the vaccine, in all likelihood, if you have the infection, you may well have a much less controlled reaction to it. So you may have a bigger inflammatory response that lasts for longer. In the same way that we know of people who were fit and well, running 3 or 4 times a week, who got COVID infection, who've then got long COVID and are unable to do the exercise and things that they did before. So I would never say to anybody that any effects that they've had, I would never dismiss them, because they're real to people, and we take it very seriously when people tell us about effects that they've had on an individual level. However, I would say that it's unusual, and it's not something that I see commonly or hear commonly, that people go from being fit and well to being unwell after they've had the vaccine. Don't know if my colleagues want to add anything to that.
Yeah, well, I'd say that it's difficult giving anecdotal stories from other people. So for somebody like that, if that was my friend, I would say, well, go to your doctor and investigate with them and see what it is, because sometimes we blame things. So, I mean, I've had things wrong with me and I think, oh, it must have been that. I tell you, so I had ulcers in my mouth, and I convinced myself I had, they were all cold sores. I actually had B12 deficiency and I'd lost 3 kilograms by the time it got diagnosed properly. So I think, just because we think it's one thing, even, I don't even know, I can assume that something's happened to me and I've got it wrong on more than one occasion. So I go to my GP a lot more now. But we aren't seeing people in clinics with vaccine injuries or things going on after vaccines. There's a lot of stories about, but sometimes it's coincidental. I haven't dismissed any of them. There was other stories linking the vaccine. People have looked into them, and sometimes there's, there is a bit of an effect, but not usually a prolonged one. And as Liz said, the effects from COVID are much riskier. And much more likely to give you long-term problems. I guess the difference for some people is you don't choose to get COVID, but you have to choose to get a vaccine. So you've got to get over that you've got to take a bit of a risk where you think you might avoid COVID, but actually most people don't avoid COVID, not in the middle of a pandemic.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Thank
you very much. We have Aura. You raise her hand. You want to ask your question, please? If you unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, sure. I posted a question on the chat, but I'm happy to ask it. So I would just like to hear the opinion of the panelists on the impact of okay, essentially my question is, was the lockdown worth it, given the negative impact that it had on various countries' economies? And the reason why many of us who are effectively not in the healthcare sector are thinking about whether it was worth it is because, like you mentioned, we are currently living with COVID. It's not over, it has not vanished, it is still here. So the question truly is, did we really need to go on such a drastic lockdown, given the impact that it had, of which many countries have not yet recovered from?
I could kick off with that, but I think a lot of people could come in on that. I'm firmly of the belief, Aura, that we needed to have a lockdown. We needed to stop widespread movement of people with the virus before we had a means of immunizing, vaccinating the public, not immunizing, vaccinating. And you are right, we are still living with COVID, but we are living with COVID in a society where the majority of people have been vaccinated and we have measures in place, and people are more educated with ways in which they can protect themselves from it. And in the unknown, there are tried and tested ways to stop a pandemic leading to mass deaths, and that is reducing the movement and mixture of the population during that time of high transmission. So that is like I said, I think a bit earlier, it is a public health intervention. Until you have a means of controlling the spread of the virus, the main way is to stop the spread of the vessels of the virus, which are the people. And I think that's my opinion. I think a fallout of that, of course, a side effect of that is the impact it has had on people's lives. It has had a massive impact on the mental health of people, for example, because of how people were isolated as a result. And I think the isolation that people suffered, in some cases, were very tragic. That said, I think there was little choice, because one of the effective ways of controlling the spread is to stop the movement of the vessels before you have other means of doing so. But I will invite my learned colleagues to add to that.
Thank you, Eva.
Can we just say, when you're adding, because we're almost at the end of the show, can you just make it a little bit shorter so that we can finish on time? Otherwise, we're going to be cut off.
I think I'll let Joel have the last word on this one.
Thank you, Liz. So it's a very valid question, Nora. I think the reason that you're asking this question is it's had a massive impact on the economies and things like that. So it's a very, very valid question. I strongly believe that what was done was appropriate. The reason I say that is because if you compare what we are in 2022 and what we were in 2020, the big difference is that we were exposed to a new virus. We didn't know how many people were going to die because of this. We did not have any treatment options in place. We did not have any vaccines in place. And we did not have a very clear pathway of what kind of severity and impact it's going to have on people. So it was almost like a stop-start mechanism that had to be used and approved by, well, supported by WHO and by many other people because of this. This is not new in some ways, or just in case you didn't know. England, way back in the 16th century, there's a village in Derbyshire called as Eyam. It's called the Plague Village. So that place was affected by plague. And what they did was they surrounded that place and they locked out the entire village. And that's how they spread, they prevented the spread of plague from that village to other places. So different forms of lockdown has been practiced in if you look at the ancient history. But when this happened in a national or rather a global scale, it felt like it had a massive impact. But in 2020 and early part of 2021, when we were still struggling to find the best treatment, the best vaccine, and the best kind of protective infection control measures we could use, I think it was appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have a kind of a quick, we're just going to go around the table. Is quickly saying, okay, I am a person who is not motivated to go and have the vaccine. So 1 minute each from the speaker to just say,
1 minute,
just
like
a few seconds. Yeah, to just say, okay.
To encourage
someone to go and have the vaccine. What would you say to them?
So I'll start off and say, if you've got questions or doubts, please come and talk to somebody. We know that it's overwhelming sometimes, the amount of information that's out there and comments from friends and family. So come and have a chat, come and talk to us about your concerns or any issues. We've seen a huge benefit in vaccination. We're not seeing people in hospital. We're not seeing people as poorly as they were before the vaccines. So no matter what you might read in social media, the vaccination has made a huge difference to the effects of COVID-19 on our families, friends, and the people around us.
Thank you for that. We can't really take everybody at this moment because it's already 10. So what we're going to do, we're going to have part 2 of this show. Please come back with your questions. We've got a lot of other questions here, but we're going to give it to the panelists at the end of the show, and we're going to put it on our social media. So thank you everybody for joining in tonight, and we'll be back next week. All right.